Okay, so he is possibly going to head into like farm in Africa, have a goat territory right now, and at that point Ed is going to pull the necessity card back up and say, okay, but in their case that might be necessary.
Does legality equal morality?
No. And all
Yeah, no, it doesn't. However, laws are designed to reflect our morals. So we need to keep that in mind. Actually, when we design laws, they are meant to reflect the morals in society.
Good to meet
Pleasure
you.
to meet you again.
Thanks so much, Ed.
Yeah, I thought,
Thanks for having me.
my pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to sit with me. As you are well aware, there is a banner in front of us, and the banner says veganism is a moral obligation. What do you think about that statement?
So already here, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to comment. From the moral perspective that I hold, and that Ed holds, and that a lot of people that are vegans or vegetarian holds, this would probably be correct. However, we have to recognize that not everyone comes from the same position. So they might see it as a moral good to be vegan, but not a moral obligation. An example that springs to mind is a conversation that Cosmic Skeptic had with Matt Dillahunty a couple of years ago. I think they have actually fallen out with each other after that conversation. I think they ended up blocking each other on Twitter and stuff like that. But yeah, not everyone would agree that this statement is true because of the obligation part. So yeah.
I'm kind of interested to hear, and this is most
Idris, we are watching a video about veganism.
I sat down to hear the points, the cases that you make, and then also I did see that of the Change My Mind edition, kind of the inspiration from that like YouTube series that went viral, and just to kind of bring up my perspective on why on initial view I had some disagreement with it.
Matt can be a bit of a drama queen, I guess, but I really enjoy his content. I did ask him a while ago if he wanted to come on, and he did say that he wasn't against the idea. So maybe at some point I'll manage to trick him onto my stream, and maybe I can talk to him about veganism.
The statement,
Please.
and so yeah, that's where I'm at.
What is your initial disagreement, which is only some disagreement? What is that initial disagreement?
Well, I think that it's very context dependent. For example, like veganism is a moral obligation. I disagree in the sense that if you look at just in the wild, right, animals are killed by other animals naturally, and that's the way it is. Is it sad? Right. Obviously, life is beautiful in any organism, but it's
Okay, so I have a feeling I know where Earthling Ad is going to go with this, and it's the whole necessity part. So the reason a lion in the wild isn't vegan is because it has to eat meat. Like, it can't eat anything else than meat. And also, we don't describe moral obligations to animals, or non-human animals, I should say, because non-human animals don't react to the moral frameworks of humanity the same way humans do. Keep in mind, morals are kind of a construction, and a construction that humans have done or made. Other animals aren't really bound to the same rules that we set up in that way, because we do not we damn, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, animals aren't moral agents in the same way that we are. Other animals, you know what I mean. When I talk about animals, I talk about non-human animals. So, just to make that clear, animals aren't moral agents in the same way that humans are, because they don't have the same agency, because they don't have the same framework to work with. Idris, I did see your posts in my Discord. I'm sorry I haven't been too active. It's been a lot of schoolwork and stuff like that. But yeah, I did see the posts. Yeah.
It's going to come to an end, and especially in the wild for animals, a lot of those situations are kind of ugly, you know? They're not, it's very brutal, and I think a lot of the time...
One of the things I like about Ed is how willing he is to actually meet people in their place. College work. To meet people in their place and try to present them with a alternate view that can sort of give them a different perspective on their own view, if that makes sense. So that's one of the things that we are going to see here.
If you look at slaughterhouses or whatever the case may be in human culture, I would argue that it's a lot more humane the way we kill animals than they would die in the wild.
Okay. Even if that is the case, let's split this into two.
So okay. I'm sorry for stopping it. We've seen 1.5 minutes, but so there shouldn't be a question of whether or not it's more humane the way we kill animals than the way a lion or wolf or whatever kills an animal. The question should be, is it humane at all? And that's sort of the issue, because you have different levels. Of course, beating a let's say you have a dog that you need to get euthanized because it's sick. Getting it euthanized is the humane thing to do. Not getting it euthanized is less humane. I would say it isn't humane, but let's say it's less humane than getting it euthanized. Killing the dog by beating it to death is even worse. So you have levels, but it's only one of those three that is the actual humane thing to do. Does that make sense?
Two different things. Firstly, let's just look at the wild animals, and then let's talk just on the point that you made. With the wild animals, when it comes to our morality, should we look to the actions of wild animals to find justifications for what we choose to do in our...
Very solid point. That's a really good point. That's
a point he makes often. That we shouldn't look to... hey, it was nice for you to tune in, Martin. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great night. This is a point that Ed makes quite often. We shouldn't be looking to wild animals to sort of make up our mind about what is humane or what is good to do, because in that case, well, we would do all sorts of horrible stuff to each other. These are not shocking thing that we encounter at first time. It's been around since the beginning of killing animals. Oh yeah.
And I totally get where you're going with that. I think the only thing is, yes, are we comparing ourselves to wild animals? Well, in some point, or to some extent, I guess yes. Which is, brings in a whole nother dilemma of we're wild animals, right? And I get where you're going with that, but
because obviously animals in the wild, and what you've said is I totally agree with. Because obviously animals in the wild, they kill out of necessity, don't they? Right. For food, they kill because they have to eat the animals they consume. But where we live, with the intelligence that we have, with the context of our modern society, for you and I, we don't have the necessity that lions do to eat meat. And also other wild animals do... a whole host of things that we would never justify. Infanticide, sexual exploitation, of course, they engage in sexually abusive acts. So there are things that wild animals do that we would never morally justify in our society just because wild animals do them. Okay,
True.
Great. So then the next point you raised was, well, in slaughterhouses, theoretically, perhaps, we could kill these animals in a way that is preferable to the way they die in the wild. Okay. That argument's an interesting argument, but it only works again with that notion of necessity. Now, the animals that we farm and kill, it's not the choice of do they get killed in a slaughterhouse or do they die in the wild. The animals in the wild will die in the wild. The animals we farm will die in a slaughterhouse. So us breeding animals into a farm, putting them into a slaughterhouse and killing them in the ways that we do, doesn't reduce the suffering that animals endure in the wild. We're not taking animals out of that context and putting them in a different context because we have to.
Okay, that one I haven't heard him use before. And I've seen a lot of his videos at this point. So yeah. But that's an interesting talking point. I agree with it, but I'm not sure it's necessarily the strongest point to make. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to think about this one, but it is a good point, I guess. But maybe I just haven't heard him use it so much before. This might be a newer point for him that he hasn't really sharpened to the point that he has with a lot of other arguments that he is quite probably going to bring up in this conversation.
We are unnecessarily breeding more animals into existence and putting them through a different system, which also causes them suffering and doesn't change anything about what happens in the world.
Okay. So now I think So now that I heard it to the end, I think I get more where it's coming from. So, this part here is about that system that we have created for farm animals. We shouldn't compare it to how animals are in the wild, because the system of industry farming or animal farming in general isn't ethical in its own right, which is why that we have to criticize that sort of in a vacuum, because it's not really contingent on how animals die in the wild. Those are similar but unrelated arguments. Okay, so I get it. I think he could have phrased it a little bit better, but I get where he's going with it.
Wild. Would you agree with that?
That is true. Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree.
Okay, so the next thing to establish then is, whilst we recognize that what happens in the wild might not be preferable for the animals who are killed in the wild, is what happens in slaughterhouses preferable for the animals who are killed in the slaughterhouses?
Well, I mean, for those individual animals, obviously, right, the goal of survival from an animal's perspective, as far as us humans know, is to survive and reproduce. Yeah, right. And so, obviously, if we're killing them, then they're not really succeeding those goals. So, I guess
on a species level, but more of an individual.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's less of the ethical approach that I think Ed is trying to get him into. That was more like you said, on a species level kind of thing. But on the individual level, this is what I have a feeling that he's going to get into. A cow or a pig or a chicken or whatever wants to live. They want to have a good life, and they want to avoid suffering as much as possible. Just like every other animal, just like humans. We tend to try to avoid suffering. So forcing the animals into this suffering position, against their will, is unethical. That's where I think he's going to go with that.
Level. The point that you initially were trying to make was that slaughterhouses are acceptable because they may inflict less suffering than what happens in the wild. So what you've created there is the recognition that the aspiration to reduce suffering is preferable. But do animals in slaughterhouses suffer?
Again, I think that varies wildly, right? If you go to the grocery store, you see cage-free eggs versus...
Yeah, usually animals in slaughterhouses suffer no matter, It's better to just avoid the whole thing, because in that case you'd know they aren't really they aren't you aren't paying for the abuse of the animals, and you know you aren't. When it comes to vegetarianism and the abuse of animals, are the people of Norway the most vegetarian people on earth in difference to other people from other countries? I'm not actually sure. I can Google that. Let's see. Country with most. Let's go for vegans. Vegans per capita. That's Israel, actually. Ooh. Vegetarians? India is ranked top with a 38% of the total population being vegetarians. Israel has a 5 to 8% of the entire population being vegan, estimated 400,000 people and growing. Many of these vegans inhabit Tel Aviv. Well, that's interesting. I guess there are one or two things that we can like about Israel. Going to bed, have fun for the rest of the stream. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for tuning in.
So I think especially nowadays, I would argue that animals kept in facilities breeding for the sole purpose of harvesting eggs, milk, meat, whatever the case. From personal experience, I haven't necessarily been to one of those facilities, but I think it's a very fair point to at least make the argument that, at least in the point we are here today in the 21st century, the situation that animals are in slaughterhouses is significantly better than it might have been in like somewhere like the 1970s or that area.
I think that.
Yeah, so that I'm not 100% sure about that argument, but so this is one of the arguments that I usually make, that let's say free range chickens. Let's say free range would be what you imagine free range should be. You know, that the chickens get a lot of space and all that. That's 100%. It's more preferable than the supply line chicken farming into the meat grinder thing that we see in the shocking horror videos from chicken farms. So yeah, that would be preferable, but yet still, at the end of the day, those animals are needlessly killed. And we wouldn't be able to. They're needlessly killed, so we are still exploiting the animals at the end of the day. So yeah, while I would say it's better than like industry farming, it's still not good enough. So if I could make every farm in the world, every animal farm in the world, into like a free range old McDonald kind of farm, I would. But that would only be a step in the right direction, or maybe a couple of steps in the right direction. It wouldn't be even close to the goal.
That's so interesting, because normally people tell me that we need to go back in time, that what we do now is really bad, so we need to go back and kind of go back. But you've kind of said something that's the opposite. Okay, let's take what you say and let's take it on face value, and let's say that what happens in the slaughterhouse may be quote unquote better than what happened in the 1970s. We can debate whether that's true, or if it's, it probably isn't, or maybe it's comparable in terms of what happens. But even if we say that is true, let's say it's better than it was in the 1970s, does that mean that it's objectively moral? Because we can always do something in a worse...
Alright, so this is one thing that Ed does that I don't really like him doing, because he talks a lot about objective morality, and I don't believe such a thing actually exists. I think we have objective moral rules based on arbitrary rule or objective moral directions based on arbitrary rules that we make for ourselves. So, for example, life is preferable to death. Well-being is health is preferable to sickness. And you can make up a bunch of these. And let's say you make up 5 of these rules: life better than death, health better than sickness. I can't think of more of them right now. Not starving better than starving. And comfort better than non-comfort. Okay, so based on those 4, we can make objectively correct decisions that will lead us closer to better outcomes based on those rules. However, those rules are arbitrary. So I don't believe that there is such a thing as objective morals. I don't believe that the foundation exists as something objective. I think those are subjective. But within the system, you have objectively good and bad decisions to make. And that's actually a Matt Dillahunty thing. So Matt Dillahunty is a great inspiration for many things in my life. Veganism not being one of them.
This way, we can always, cause more suffering. We can always cause more pain. We can always cause more fear. But does the fact that we can cause more of something make causing it in any capacity morally justified?
Well, of course not. And that's a totally fair argument. Objectively, is it necessarily right what we're doing? The answer would be no.
Okay.
Right, which supports your argument. Now, the only argument I would be making is there's a demand for these products. Yes. And we as people, we have the intelligence and the ability to be able to take advantage of these animals. Is that morally okay?
Okay. Do you subscribe to the philosophy that might makes right?
No, because I think that's way too general of a statement. So I would.
Yeah, might makes right is basically the white power philosophy.
Say no.
But the statement that you made just before then was, is it moral to do these things to animals because we have the capacity to do it? You stalled, you thought about it, and you didn't say no. So the point of me asking the question, the might makes right question, is the question you asked yourself. Right. Is it moral to do the things to animals because we have the capacity to do it?
No, not necessarily. So no, objectively, is it moral to raise animals for the purpose of harvesting their meat, their eggs, their milk? The answer is no. Right. Now, initially when addressing the original question, I kind of saw it in the value of trade-offs, right? Comparison. So immediately the first thought that I came to mind that we kind of went over is comparing slaughterhouse killing, raising animals versus wild animals killing. So that's the first thing that came to my mind. What is preferable? I would say slaughterhouse.
Okay. Now let's move on. So you've decided that is preferable. So now let's do another comparison: slaughterhouses or harvesting plants.
Harvesting plants, I would say.
So if we establish that in your eyes, slaughterhouses is preferable to what happens in the wild, but importantly, we then establish that harvesting plants is preferable to slaughterhouses. Does that mean that veganism is a moral obligation on the fact that we've assigned that plant?
Wait, sorry, I missed that.
I would say.
So, if we establish that in your eyes, slaughterhouses is preferable to what happens in the wild, but importantly, we then establish that harvesting plants is preferable to slaughterhouses. Does that mean that veganism is a moral obligation on the fact that we've assigned that plant production is more morally justified than animal production?
That's a tough question to answer for me. I don't think it's as easy as a logical A to B. As people, we have a demand. As a large society, obviously, as time goes by, there are more and more people pushing for this, for a veganism idea, whether it be animal rights, whether it be environmental reasons, whether it just be health and diet, whatever the case. I think as long as people want these products and we have the ability to get them, then I would think.
Yeah, but should we get them? That's basically the question being asked.
I would argue that it's not necessarily immoral that we do that.
So
Okay, but in that case, you have already acknowledged that might does make right.
moral justification for what we do to animals is because we want to do it to animals.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going. And
there is no way outside of this. You have to either acknowledge this or no.
Again, I think that's just kind of reducing it to. I think there's always context, right? And obviously we have certain.
Okay, so he is possibly going to head into like farm in Africa, have a goat territory right now, and at that point Ed is going to pull the necessity card back up and say, okay, but in their case that might be necessary.
Laws in place in terms of what is acceptable in animal confinement areas and raising animals, and we also have animal rights groups that influence laws regarding hunting, whatever the case.
Sure. Does legality equal morality?
No, and
no, it doesn't. However, laws are designed to reflect our morals. So we need to keep that in mind. Actually, when we design laws, they are meant to reflect the morals in society. They don't always do, but that's sort of the eternal struggle of trying to design better and better laws and get rid of bad laws, is because we are trying to sort of distill our morals into a system that we have to follow. So that's what laws sort of are meant as.
Although I would argue that we should base our laws mostly off of morality. I think
we do already. So
that's kind of what the idea of laws are. Is like we form laws. Why is murder illegal? Because it's immoral.
Right.
Like essentially, right. You go back to centuries ago. Most laws were formed off of like, I would say it's fair to say mostly biblical values.
Yes.
And most of those I think come from an idea of some certain type of morality, or at least what they used to view as moral.
Yeah.
And so I would say that.
Okay. So let's have a look at your morality then. When it comes to animals, or it comes in general, what sort of characteristics do you think a quote unquote kind of moral person would have? How do they live?
In terms of animals?
Just generally. What in your eyes is the example of a moral human?
Oh, that's a difficult one. But I would say a person that cares about the well-being of others around them. That would be like step one at least.
So, okay, I would say that, well, I'm going to kind of try to take it in the context of animals, focus on the subject matter. I would say, that doing what is the least suffering, the most humane, very general kind of dumb term, for all parties, right? So for example, you look at an injured animal on the side of the road that's suffering and in pain.
Yeah.
Is it more moral to kill that animal? I would argue probably.
Sure. But what about in the context of where an animal is not suffering on the side of the road, they're suffering because of what we do to them? What about when it comes down to that notion of humane? How do we then apply these words in a objective and consistent manner to what we do to animals? And what I mean by that is, what does the word humane mean? If we open up a thesaurus and we find the word...
Yeah, okay, so here we come to the compassionate caring part.
Humane. What synonyms are there for the word humane?
I would equate it to suffering, or the opposite of suffering.
What's the opposite of suffering, I guess?
So if you act in a humane way, you act in a way that would ensure that there is no suffering.
That would make you a compassionate person, a kind person.
Yes.
So when we open up the thesaurus, the other words, the synonyms we see are words compassionate, kind, and benevolent. So then the question becomes, is unnecessarily exploiting and killing animals kind, compassionate, benevolent, and, of course, humane then?
It would not be. It would not be.
So, what we established before is that veganism, in your words...
Oh, God. Oh. All right.
Is morally preferable. You said it was like more morally right.
Yes, it is. It is morally preferable compared to eating. And for me, I think
okay, so here we get into the thing. Like, based on what they have already established, there is no way outside of veganism unless you absolutely have to eat meat or any animal product, use any animal products. There is no way outside of veganism unless it's necessary, which means living in the industrialized world, based on what they have said in this conversation, this guy should agree that veganism is actually a moral obligation if you want to be a kind and humane and compassionate person.
Yes, preferable compared to eating, and for me, I think it matters a lot more just in terms of like the environment. Like I'm not vegan myself, just because I enjoy like.
And this is interesting because he's about to say that it's important for the environment, and vegans usually say that the environment is sort of a secondary goal of veganism. The morality is the main focus. However, I would say that the environment is a part of the moral equation because we want to make our planet as inhabitable and as good to live in or on as possible. Which means that the environment is actually quite an important part to that whole calculus. Yeah.
Like the taste of eggs and meat and whatever the case. And so do I feel a certain type of obligation knowing that the foods that I choose to eat contribute to environmental problems that contribute to obviously death of animals. Of course, and is that something to think about? Yes, and I think everybody should think about that, but then I think it really just comes down to trade-offs, and I think a lot of people, myself included, aren't necessarily willing to make changes in terms of diet.
And that would be because you enjoy the taste.
Yeah. Yes, partially. It's kind of hard to just bring it down that much. Just
it is. But that's what you had just said when we got through that, and I said, you think that veganism mostly. You said that veganism is morally, and I said you said veganism is morally preferable. You said yes. When it boils down to it, I like how these things taste. Okay.
Yes.
Does sensory pleasure morally justify our actions?
It can do in some cases. Well, maybe not actually. Sensory pleasure wouldn't be the justification, I think. I would say that no, it isn't the justifying factor of it. I have to think about this.
I would say no. It should it? No. How we act, if we like something, if something feels good, and like we were talking about earlier, does the ability that you can do something determine whether or not it's right? No, it does not.
So the justification that you had for not being vegan just a moment ago, and then you said mostly was the justification you're using was taste, which is a sensory pleasure, of course, which you've just established doesn't provide a moral justification for you to continue consuming meat, dairy, and eggs. So we've established in your eyes that it is morally preferable, and then the justification that you had for continuing to do so doesn't morally justify it. So where do we go from here?
Well, I guess that would be a question I have for you. So, obviously you're creating a dialogue, which is something I enjoy very much, why I sat down to talk with you.
I would say that where do we go from here? I would say that maybe try to reduce your meat and animal product consumption. That's step one. And then after you have reduced it a fair amount, like, think to yourself, how many days a week do I need to eat meat? Do I feel the need to eat meat? Okay, so let's say that's 4 days a week. Okay, only eat meat those 4 days a week. Cut out meat from your diet the other 3 days of the week. And then, you know, and then maybe half a year down the line, you think to yourself, you know, I could probably do another day without meat. And now you're down to 3 days a week. And then maybe half a year down the line, you realize that I actually don't need to eat meat this often either. So you reduce it even more. Or you can just do, like, for example, instead of having a sliced bread with ham on it, you can do peanut butter or something else. For a couple of the meals, try to just cut out meat from the parts, from the meals that you are able to cut it out. And try to find, maybe there are some vegan options, what do you call that? Meat-ish products that are good, that are being sold. You can try to transition over to that, like, oh yeah, I feel like going for like a ham sandwich, but maybe I can try it with like this meat-ish ham instead of normal meat, and then you try it. If it's not good, then maybe try something else or whatever. I think that a transition from eating meat over to vegetarianism is a good step in the right direction. And I also think that that's the easier part to do, because a lot of products have like might have like milk powder in them that you don't know how to get rid of those parts from your diet before you manage to do enough research on it. So I think that vegetarianism would be the greatest stepping stone that one could take away from meat in the first place. Now, like I said, try to just reduce meat consumption little by little. Just instead of a ham sandwich, go for something else. Think to yourself, do I need to eat meat 7 days a week? Probably not. Okay, what about 6 days a week? Or 5 or 4? Okay, I only need 4 days, then I only eat meat those 4 days a week. And try to make like a dietary plan for the rest of the week. And then try to reduce it over time. I think that's the most effective way for a lot of people to cut it out. To transition over to veganism.
With you today. Is the goal to, and this is something you brought up, should morals and should morality match up with legality? So I guess the next question I would ask you is, do you want to see some kind of change in laws regarding should we be able to sell meat and other animal products? I guess that's a question that I would ask you.
Well, the way I see it is that the future that I would like is a future where, of course, we as humans choose not to partake in these industries, but also, of course, that unnecessarily causing suffering would be an illegal thing. Now, does that mean that's where I should focus my time? No, for a couple of factors. Firstly, these changes come from individual determination. Now, the way that I would like the future to look like, which is just merely a situation where we reduce animal suffering and of course human suffering. We want to reduce all forms of suffering as much as is possible. The only way to get there is to convince individuals that these are issues that we need to care about. And then if we want to demand that change, we have to firstly embody it as individuals. So yes, I would like to get to the point where we take what we do to animals as a serious legal concern. We do in some contexts. If a dog walks past now, and I stomp that dog to death, we all agree that should be illegal. I just merely think that stabbing a pig in the throat should also be illegal as well. But to get to that point, we have to create a consensus of opinion that that's where we should be. Because laws, whilst we would hope they're determined by morality, are more determined by cultural norms, by what that society thinks is acceptable rather than what is objectively acceptable. Hence why in certain cultures homosexuality is a sin, or is illegal. Not because it should be, because it's immoral, but because the culture is determined that the consensus of thinking is that it should be. But it isn't immoral. So, but to get to the point where we start to enact legal change, we need a shift in culture.
Okay, so now we get back into what I was saying about how moral frameworks, it's important to keep that in mind, that different moral frameworks get you to different moral conclusions. So, for example, when Saudi Arabia, whatever, thinks that homosexuals should be stoned to death or whatever it is, they see that as moral, or at least the state does, and the people partaking see that as moral because in their framework that's what they have to do. Now I think that's despicable. I think that means that we will have to sort of convince them by doing international pressure or whatever, that their moral frameworks have some pretty obvious flaws to them. So it's not about what's objectively moral, in my opinion. It's what's better suited for maximizing well-being, is how I would describe it.
Cultural norms and also societal thinking. So individual change is paramount to creating legislative change, which in the future will create a more meaningful world for the reduction, in the pursuit of reducing suffering.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you would argue that obviously it's not very realistic to expect a legal change like that in the short run, but you do want to see in the long run some sort of
Okay, so here's the thing, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen the video, so he might not take issue with it, but I have a feeling that he is going to take issue with Ed wanting in the long run to ban slaughterhouses, to make them illegal. However, it actually makes sense. So Ed doesn't want to make it illegal overnight because he doesn't think that's viable, a viable solution to the problems, which I would agree with. But he wants to see human culture progress to a point where we recognize that what is happening in slaughterhouses is actually animal abuse, which then would mean that we would, because of the moral recognition that it's bad, have to make it illegal to have slaughterhouses.
Outlaw of animal products being sold and consumed.
My concern is less on seeing a legal, a law in the law books that makes this illegal. I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about influencing individuals
Societal change.
Exactly. And the consequence of that is that we will get to the point where we go, well, hang on, this shouldn't be something that we shouldn't be able to go, put a pig in a facility and stab them in the throat. We shouldn't take, a dairy cow and stab them because we can't take any more milk from them. Those things should no longer be acceptable. But the consequence of that, that's not the end goal. The end goal that I'm I'm looking for will create a consequence where that happens, but I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in seeing that law. That's not where my priorities lie. My priorities lie in changing people's opinions so that we stop supporting these industries and these industries no longer exist. And at that point, we probably will make it a law not to stab animals needlessly to death. But and that's not the objective. The objective is to change consumer minds and to get them to think about an issue that we don't think about. We go into a supermarket, we go into a restaurant, and we don't even think about buying animal products as being a moral concern. We're unconscious consumers in that sense. We do it because it's habitual, we do it because we've been raised in those environments where it's normalized. And so the first piece of the puzzle for me is to get people to recognize that that it is a moral concern to begin with. And then the second piece of the puzzle is to get them to recognize that their moral code already aligns with the reduction of suffering for animals.
Okay.
Great.
All right, I think we had a really good conversation today, and I really appreciate all the points you brought up. Certainly makes me, think. And where does it leave me now? I think honestly, our conversation, kind of the subject matter aside, is a lot more, philosophical, and in terms of like what is morality, and where does that lie in terms of just not necessarily buying food at a supermarket, but just our everyday actions in general. Is that going to affect my behavior? Partially, right? Like if I see a fly coming into my house, I'm still going to grab the fly swatter. But
what about when you're in a supermarket and you see cow flesh, chicken flesh, pig flesh, cow secretions, chicken secretions, and also plant foods? What about your decision making in those moments?
I'm definitely gonna think about it. And obviously, right, if I'm eating meat products 3 days a week, right, then I feel like that's, you always got to start somewhere. You always got to start with some small type of change, right? And obviously some people are going to be willing to make a lot more change than others. I'm not the biggest change willing person. I'm very interested in the dialogue and stuff. Oh, what effects does this have? So something that for me specifically, if I assess, oh, this is the diet that I have, to maybe cut back from the quantity of these products, not necessarily cold turkey. I'm still gonna make some some nice chicken cutlets or whatever. But
how will you morally justify making those chicken cutlets? Because what we're doing, right, is we're saying, all right, these animals over here, here's 10 animals.
Oh, so now it's getting a little bit upset with them. I would say that I recognize why Ed is being a little bit more, aggressive in the questioning right now. However, I do think that and maybe he's doing this because he is afraid that these thoughts will be in this guy's head for like an hour, and then he will never think about it again. So I get it. Try to hammer home the point. I would say that if this guy says that, maybe if I only eat meat 3 days a week, I would probably try to be a little bit encouraging and tell him that, okay, so try that project for about half a year. After half a year, try to reduce it even more if you are able to. Like I said earlier. So try your best to always do the reduction of harm. Always try to go for the least harmful option. If you fall off the wagon a couple times, don't be discouraged. Jump on again and try until you succeed. Is basically where I would go with this, but I do get the frustration with this.
5 animals, okay, you can live, but they have to die. So why is it okay to kill those 5 animals if we're cutting down? Why do those chickens have to die for the cutlets?
Right, okay, well, I'm looking at it more in terms of sample size, right? I'm not looking necessarily at, this chicken gets to live, this chicken doesn't. I'm just looking at it in terms of if the goal is to reduce.
Is the goal to reduce?
Yes. Yes, the goal is to reduce. Cutting out is also reduction. So, yes.
So
that is the goal.
Does the reduction make it moral?
No. But reduction, it's by definition what you do. You try to reduce harm as much as you can.
Well, does it make the killing of the animals moral?
Okay, so if every year you kill 10 people, and then 1 year you kill 9 people, then 8 people, then 7, then so that's harm reduction. Okay, but if every year you kill 10 people and then you decide that I'm not going to do that anymore, I stop killing people, I will I won't be killing people anymore. So from year 5, whatever, you stop killing people altogether. You have reduced harm. So yeah, I do think that reduction is the goal, but it's just because I see elimination as as reduction.
Well, no, but certainly reducing the killing is a moral act, I would argue.
Okay. So, when we think about this from a moral perspective, I think what we do is we view the whole scope of what happens.
I think at this point I would almost drag it into the electoral politics of the United States. So I would be like, okay, so I assume that you, Ed, in 2020 didn't vote for Donald Trump. Oh wait, he's not a. Maybe he is a citizen now. I assume you wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump if you were American, at least. Okay. Would you have voted for Biden? And if the answer is yes, then that's interesting. Why would you have voted for Biden when he is clearly not the perfect goal? So, at that point, I would say, yeah, you vote for Biden to reduce the harm. Is that like, do you vote for Biden and go like, oh well, that's it? No, of course. But it is the reduction of harm. And even if you had the perfect candidate, that still would be harm reduction. And you would still have to vote for that person.
Happens to animals, and we say it's the mass production that's wrong. Okay. But even if we just kill the one chicken for the cutlets you're talking about, what happens to them, the suffering and ultimately the taking of life, that's not diminished because we didn't do it to 9 other chickens. When we view issues of morality in the context that we are now, we're viewing it from the issue of the individual, because what we're talking about is our...
Okay, so I agree, but however, it is better to kill 1 than to kill 10. Like, that is objectively better. So, is it perfect? No, you shouldn't kill any of them. But and as a aspiring vegan, fuck, Demon Mom has fucking broken my brain with her stupidity. As an aspiring vegan, I guess, I agree that you shouldn't kill any of them, and that you can't be happy. You can't. The job isn't done until you haven't killed any of them. But the guy has a point that it is moral to reduce harm. That's what we always try to do. Always try to do harm reduction. If you eliminate it, that's still harm reduction.
Individual experiences, suffering, pain, fear, the taking of life. Of course, it happens on a mass scale, but inherently what we're talking about is issues of individual experience. So, when it comes down to this issue of morality, sure, you could say that it's more moral, but you could also make the argument that stabbing 2 people is more moral than stabbing 5 people. It's more moral, but it doesn't mean that it is moral. So when we talk about reduction, if reduction shouldn't be the goal, because a reduction is just merely causing suffering, causing less suffering, but still causing it.
No, right, and you're right. I'm just arguing you asked.
Yeah, so here we just have a linguistical difference in what we think about when we think about reduction. So we do actually agree, but we just disagree on what the meaning of the word reduction means.
What is my personal, where do I go specifically myself from here?
Yeah.
And that's my answer for you.
Is that the, and what I mean by that, is that the end goal? Is the reduction the end? Because I just described it to you, but here's what I think could be an alternative. The reason that we say reducing is it creates psychological distance from what we're accepting. It's kind of like a compromise, isn't it? You know, we go, well, I recognize this is wrong, but it's quite psychologically daunting for me to make the change, so I'm just going to kind of do this kind of half measure, if you like. It's the psychologically daunting aspect of it that's holding us back. So instead of saying reducing, why don't we say day by day? And maybe you heard me say this to the other person, I'm not sure. But a day by day thing. Rather than saying, from this moment on, I am going to be a vegan for my life, which sounds maybe psychologically daunting. Maybe we say, for the next meal, it's going to be plant-based. And then for the next meal, it's going to be plant-based. And we just take it one day at a time. So instead of thinking of my life, which, you know, hopefully for you is maybe another 65, 70, 80 years, hopefully, you know, of course I hope, as long as it possibly can be. So the prospect of changing something for that length of time may be psychologically daunting, but the prospect of changing something for one day is a lot less daunting. And then each day that goes by becomes easier. And then after a certain number of days, you go, well, I don't ever want to consume those again, because maybe you have a mentality shift. So rather than saying reducing, maybe we say day by day, meal by meal, plant-based. And then if we slip up on one meal on one day in the future, we go, okay, I've slipped up, but the important thing is to keep going. The next meal.
Hey, one would think that I've seen this video before, but I haven't actually done that.
Next day. Maybe that's a different way of looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a...
It's a different way of looking at it. And maybe for some people, that's probably a better approach than the one I suggested. However, I do think that the one I suggested also have a value for a lot of people. Just think about how many days a week do you feel the need to eat meat? Okay, only 3 days. Or you can do the whole day by day thing. I think both of them would be effective ways to reduce harm. Whether or not his approach would be more effective than mine, I don't know. But it's an interesting conversation. I would fucking love to have him on to talk about this.
That's a fair, like, if you're looking at, I mean, same like if you're on a diet, right? Like, yeah. Oh, I need to reduce, I'm eating this amount of calories, I need to eat this amount of calories, right? You're still gonna have cheat meals, whatever the case. I think at the end of the day, the difference doesn't really have much of a difference in terms of effect, like if you actually do it, right?
The difference for a diet is a diet's for ourselves. Veganism's for someone else.
Right.
So when we cheat on veganism, we're not cheating on ourselves. We're cheating on our morals, but fundamentally we're cheating on someone else, and that's the differentiation. To view veganism not from our perspective, not to view veganism from our viewpoint, but to view it from their viewpoint.
Of the animals.
When we put ourselves in the position of the animal, and that's just empathy. You know, it's not requiring any great stretch of our imagination. It's just an empathy thing. And when we recognize that they too have the capacities that we hold as being morally valuable within ourselves, the sentience, the consciousness, the capacity to experience in the ways that are morally relevant. When we recognize that they have those capacities, all we have to do is experience and think about their experience. And when we view it from their perspective rather than our own, we realize that a cheat day is just cheating on our morals. A cheat day is a knife in the throat for them.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, very fair points that you've brought up, and I really appreciate the dialogue you've had with me again, and it was a pleasure meeting and speaking with you.
Likewise. I have had a great conversation.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
it. Have a great...
Hey, Earthling Ed, this one goes out to you. And this one, I think I'm gonna make this into like a YouTube short or something. Earthling Ed, wait, we're gonna do this. Earthling Ed, hey, my name is Lord Saether. I'm a Norwegian streamer who is currently on my way to become a vegan, largely thanks to you, actually. I want to use this particular moment to invite you onto my stream. I do have some really interesting topics that I would love to hear your thoughts about it. So please, if you ever see this video, hit me up.